A scream pierces the Arizona desert, where shadows hide bruises and hope fights to survive. Meet Evelyn, a young woman beaten down by her own kin, her spirit clinging to a flicker of defiance. In the harsh frontier of 1870, one act of courage from an unlikely savior could rewrite her fate. Will she break free from the chains of cruelty, or will the desert swallow her dreams? This gripping tale of resilience and redemption will keep you hooked until the final moment. Subscribe now to dive into this powerful story and share in the comments where you're joining us from. Let's uncover how far Evelyn's journey takes her together. In the Arizona Territory of 1870, where the sun scorched the earth and the wind carried the clatter of hammers on railroad ties, a small frontier town clung to the edge of the prairie. Dust swirled through its rutted streets, and the air thrummed with the restless pulse of a land both wild and tamed. At the town's fringe, in a sagging clapboard house patched with tar and hope, lived Evelyn, a young woman whose brown hair fell in tangles over eyes that rarely met the world. Her home was no sanctuary. It was a cage of weathered wood and unspoken dread, where every creak of the floorboards signaled danger. Evelyn moved through her days like a shadow, her footsteps light as a deer's, her breath shallow to avoid notice. Each dawn, before the first rooster crowed, she rose from a thin pallet on the floor, her body stiff from the previous night's blows. Her father, a man pickled in whiskey and rage, ruled the house with a fist that struck faster than his slurred words. Her two brothers, cut from the same coarse cloth, saw her as a punching bag for their frustrations, their boots leaving marks as often as their hands. Her mother, a hollowed-out figure with eyes like chipped flint, offered no shield. Her silence was complicity, born of her own fear of the same fate. The bruises on Evelyn's arms and ribs were not accidents. They were a map of cruelty, etched in purple and yellow, a testament to a family that saw her as less than human. The house smelled of stale liquor and sweat, its air thick with tension that could snap like a brittle twig. Evelyn's chores were endless, hauling water from the town well, scrubbing pots until her knuckles bled, chopping wood until her shoulders screamed. Every task was a tightrope walk, a single misstep, a spilled bucket, a dish set down too hard, could summon a storm of fists. Her father's voice, rough as gravel, would bellow, "Worthless girl," before his hand found her cheek. Her brothers would join in, their laughter sharp as spurs, while her mother turned away, muttering about Evelyn's failures. The town knew. Shopkeepers saw the marks when she fetched flour. Cowboys noticed her flinch at sudden noises, but no one spoke. Her suffering was a private affair, they figured, best left behind, closed doors. Yet, in the cracks of her brutal routine, Evelyn stole moments of defiance. When she trudged to the well under the weight of a splintered yoke, or hacked at firewood with a dull axe, she'd pause to watch the horizon. Beyond the town's edge, the prairie stretched wide, its grasses swaying like a sea under the wind's rough hand. Distant hawks wheeled against a sky bruised with clouds, their cries sharp and free. In those fleeting seconds, Evelyn let herself dream of a place where hands didn't strike, where her voice might matter, where she could stand tall instead of shrinking. The thought was a spark in the dark, fragile but stubborn, refusing to die under the weight of her family's cruelty. Each evening, as the sun bled red across the desert, Evelyn braced for the inevitable. The beatings came without pattern, sometimes for slowness, sometimes for daring to meet her father's bloodshot gaze, sometimes for no reason at all. The uncertainty was its own torture, keeping her body taut, her heart racing even in sleep. She'd learned to swallow her tears. Crying only sharpened their anger or fed their amusement. Instead, she buried her pain deep, where it hardened into something else. Not bitterness, but a quiet endurance, like a cactus clinging to life in barren soil. She scrubbed floors, mended torn shirts, and whispered to herself that this could not be her forever. Somewhere, beyond the suffocating walls of her home, there had to be a world that didn't bruise her body or soul. The townsfolk's indifference cut almost as deep as the blows. Whispers followed her, about her weakness, her cursed luck, but no one offered a hand. To them, she was invisible, a ghost in a faded dress, unworthy of rescue. Yet, beneath the weight of her scars, Evelyn carried a flicker of hope, a belief that one day something might shift. She didn't know what or how, only that she clung to it like a lifeline, even as the shadows of her family loomed larger each day. Unseen, beyond the town's edge, a pair of eyes had begun to watch, and the winds of change were stirring, faint but growing, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Beyond the town's edge, where the prairie gave way to tangled scrub and the horizon burned with the promise of something wilder, a lone figure lived in quiet defiance of the world that shunned him. Nakai, an Apache widower, made his home in a low-slung hut of adobe and weathered pine, its roof slanted against the relentless Arizona sun of 1870. The townsfolk called him a ghost of a bygone era, a warrior whose people had been pushed to the margins by settlers' greed. His long hair, tied back with a leather thong, and the scars crisscrossing his arms, spoke of battles fought and lost, but his silence carried a weight heavier than words. Nakai moved through life with the steady rhythm of the land, tending a small patch of corn, tracking deer through the washes, his bow and knife always close. Yet, beneath his stoic exterior, grief gnawed like a coyote at a bone. Years ago, a fever had stolen his wife and infant son, leaving a void that the desert's vastness couldn't fill. Nakai's days were solitary, punctuated only by wary exchanges at the town's trading post. The townsfolk's eyes followed him, sharp with suspicion, their whispers branding him a threat or a savage. He bore their scorn with a dignity that made them uneasy, his gaze steady as a hawk's, missing nothing. It was on one such trip, as he bartered deer hides for salt and bullets, that he first saw Evelyn clearly, not just as a shadow slipping through the town's dusty streets, but as a soul carrying a burden too heavy for her slight frame. Her movements were cautious, like a rabbit sensing a predator, her shoulders hunched under an invisible weight. He noticed the way she flinched when a shopkeeper raised his voice, the faint purple marks blooming beneath her sleeve as she reached for a sack of flour. Nakai knew those signs. He'd seen them in his own people, broken by cruelty disguised as conquest. He told himself it wasn't his place to intervene. The town already viewed him as an outsider, a spark that could ignite their fears into something uglier. Stepping into a white family's affairs would only draw their ire, perhaps their guns. Yet, as days turned to weeks, Evelyn's presence lingered in his mind, like dust that wouldn't settle. On early mornings, when he hunted near the scrubland bordering her family's land, he'd catch glimpses of her, hauling water, chopping wood, her face turned briefly toward the open prairie. In those moments, her eyes held a longing that mirrored his own, a silent call to a world beyond pain. Nakai felt a stirring, not just of pity, but of recognition. Her endurance, quiet as stone, reminded him of his wife's strength before the fever took her. It wasn't weakness he saw in Evelyn, but a fire banked low, waiting for a breath to flare. He began to watch more closely, not as a stalker, but as a sentinel. From the cover of mesquite and sagebrush, he noted how she limped after a night of her father's drunken rages, how her hands trembled as she hung laundry, yet never faltered in their work. Each mark on her skin was a story of survival, and each careful step a defiance of despair. Nakai's solitude, once a shield, began to feel like a cage. He'd sworn to live apart, to let the town's troubles pass him by, but the sight of Evelyn's suffering chipped away at that resolve. Memories of his wife surfaced, her laughter, her gentle hands, and with them, a protective instinct he thought long buried. One sweltering afternoon, as he tracked a jackrabbit through a dry wash, Nakai saw Evelyn stumble under the weight of a water yoke. She fell to her knees, the bucket spilling into the dust, and a passing cowboy's mocking laugh rang out like a whip crack. Nakai froze, his hand tightening on his bow. He wanted to step forward, to lift the yoke, to silence the laughter with a look. But he held back, knowing his presence might bring her more trouble than aid. Instead, he watched as she rose, her jaw set, and dragged the buckets back toward the well. That night, by the flicker of his fire, Nakai sat with his thoughts, the desert's chorus of coyotes and wind filling the silence. He wondered how long she could endure, how long her spirit could hold against the weight of her family's cruelty. And he wondered, with a pang sharp as a blade, if he could keep turning away. The desert night hung heavy, its silence broken only by the distant howl of a coyote and the crackle of Nakai's fire, its embers fading like the last of his resolve. The question that haunted him, whether he could keep turning away from Evelyn's suffering, had no easy answer, but it lingered like smoke, curling through his thoughts as he sharpened his knife under the stars. In the Arizona Territory of 1870, the line between right and wrong was as blurred as the horizon at dusk, but something in Evelyn's quiet endurance had begun to redraw that line for him. Days bled into weeks, and the town's rhythm trudged on, wagons rattling, saloon doors swinging, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer echoing like a heartbeat. Evelyn's life, though, was a different kind of rhythm, one of survival measured in careful steps and stifled breaths. Her family's cruelty had sharpened, as if sensing her spirit's faint rebellion. One evening, as the sky burned crimson and the air thickened with the threat of a storm, the house became a tinderbox. Evelyn had spent the day hauling water, scrubbing floors, and preparing a meager supper of beans and cornbread. Her hands moved with practiced precision, but precision wasn't enough. A single mistake, a spoonful of salt spilled into the stew, ignited her father's rage. His voice, slurred with whiskey, roared through the house like a prairie fire. "You can't do nothin' right," he bellowed, his fist crashing against her jaw. Her brothers, eager as wolves, joined in, their boots finding her ribs as she crumpled to the floor. Her mother stood in the doorway, her face a mask of contempt, muttering, "Ungrateful girl, always causin' trouble." Evelyn curled into herself, arms shielding her head, but the blows kept coming, each one a hammer strike against her fading strength. The pain was familiar, but tonight it carried a weight that pressed deeper, crushing something vital within her. She'd endured years of silence, swallowing her cries to deny her tormentors the satisfaction. But this time, something broke. A raw, jagged scream tore from her throat, a sound not just of pain, but of despair, sharp enough to pierce the walls of the clapboard house and carry into the night. It was a cry that demanded to be heard, a plea that refused to be ignored. Nakai was crossing the town's edge, a sack of traded pelts slung over his shoulder, when the sound hit him like a gunshot. His steps faltered, his senses sharpening. He knew that voice, though he'd never heard it break like this. The desert's quiet amplified the cry, guiding him toward the sagging house where lamplight spilled through cracked shutters. He moved swiftly, silent as a shadow, his bow slung across his back, his knife a steady weight at his side. As he reached the door, the scene stopped him cold. Evelyn on the floor, her body curled against the onslaught, her father looming with a raised fist, her brothers circling like vultures. The air reeked of liquor and violence. Nakai stepped into the doorway, his presence filling the space like a storm cloud. The room froze, the only sound the ragged breathing of the men and Evelyn's stifled gasps. His eyes, dark and unyielding, locked on her father. "Enough," he said, his voice low, steady as the desert itself, but carrying a weight that made the floorboards seem to shudder. Her father turned, face flushed with drink, and snarled, "This ain't your business, Indian. Get out." He lunged as if to shove Nakai, but the Apache stood rooted, his stance a warning carved in stone. "She stays no longer," Nakai said, his words cutting through the haze of rage. "I've seen what you do. No more." Her brothers puffed up, fists clenched, but faltered under Nakai's gaze, which held the quiet menace of a man who'd faced death and walked away. Evelyn, barely conscious, lifted her head, her swollen eyes meeting his. For the first time, someone stood between her and the storm. Her father spat. "Take her then! She's a curse!" The words were meant to wound, but to Evelyn, they were a key turning in a lock. Nakai bent, lifting her gently, her weight light as a sparrow in his arms. The family's shouts followed them into the night. Threats, curses. But Nakai didn't look back. Each step carried her further from the cage of her past. As he walked, the desert seemed to hold its breath, the stars above bearing witness. If you're moved by stories of courage and redemption, like Evelyn's, consider subscribing to our channel to follow their journey, and others like it. We'd be honored to have you along for the ride. Nakai's hut lay ahead, a faint glow in the darkness, promising a sanctuary where the echoes of violence couldn't reach. The faint glow of Nakai's hut pierced the Arizona night, a beacon of refuge where the echoes of violence dissolved into the desert's vast silence. Evelyn, cradled in his arms, felt the world shift beneath her, each step carrying her toward a life untainted by fists and fear. In the Arizona territory of 1870, where the land stretched wild and unbroken, Nakai's small adobe dwelling stood as a fortress against the past, its walls sturdy with the promise of a new beginning. Inside, the air was warm with the scent of sage and wood smoke, a stark contrast to the stale reek of her family's house. Nakai set Evelyn on a pallet of woven blankets, his movements careful, as if handling something fragile yet unbroken. Her ribs ached, her face throbbed, but the absence of shouts or raised hands felt like a miracle. She tensed, waiting for demands or anger, but Nakai only crouched beside her, his dark eyes steady. "Rest," he said, the word soft but firm, like the earth beneath their feet. He offered a clay bowl of water and a paste of crushed herbs, guiding her trembling hands to apply it to her bruises. The salve stung, then soothed, a small act of care that felt foreign after years of cruelty. Evelyn's mind churned with questions. Why he'd risked so much, what he wanted. But exhaustion won, pulling her into a sleep unmarred by fear for the first time in years. Days unfolded in a rhythm as steady as the desert's pulse. Evelyn's body mended slowly, the bruises fading to shadows, her ribs protesting less with each breath. Nakai hunted, returning with jackrabbit or quail, and cooked simple meals over the fire. Cornmeal cakes, roasted meat, wild berries tart on the tongue. His silence wasn't cold, but patient, a space where Evelyn could exist without shrinking. At first, she flinched when he entered the room, her body braced for a blow that never came. Each time, Nakai's calm presence chipped away at her fear, like wind wearing down stone. One morning, she woke to find him outside, tending a patch of corn and squash under the rising sun. His hands moved with purpose, coaxing life from the arid soil, and Evelyn watched, an ache stirring in her chest. His strength wasn't the kind that crushed, it was rooted, enduring, like the mesquite that thrived in the harshest sands. As her strength returned, Evelyn tried to help, fetching water, sweeping the packed earth floor, fumbling with a knife to skin a rabbit. She braced for criticism, but Nakai only nodded, sometimes guiding her hands with a quiet, like this. His patience was a language she was learning to speak, one free of scorn. He taught her to move through the desert without leaving a trace, to read the tracks of a coyote in the dust, to find herbs hidden in the scrub. Her first attempts were clumsy, her steps too loud, but Nakai never mocked her. When she knocked an arrow and missed a target, he said simply, "Again," his voice steady as a horizon line. For the first time, failure didn't mean punishment. It meant growth. One evening, as the sky bled orange and the desert cooled, Nakai sat by the fire, carving a bowstring from sinew. Evelyn, stronger now, sat nearby, mending a torn shirt. The silence between them was comfortable, like the hum of cicadas outside. Nakai spoke of the land, how the stars mapped stories of his people, how the wind carried memories of those long gone. Evelyn listened, her hands still, drinking in words that felt like a gift. Hesitantly, she shared a piece of herself, a childhood memory of chasing fireflies before her father's rage darkened her world. Nakai's eyes met hers, not with pity, but with respect, and in that moment, she felt seen, not as a burden, but as a person. The days grew into weeks, and Evelyn's spirit began to unfurl, like a cactus bloom after rain. She laughed once, a soft sound at her own tangled attempt to weave a basket, and the noise startled her, unfamiliar, yet warm. Nakai's gaze softened, a flicker of warmth in his usually guarded eyes. Their bond wasn't loud or sudden. It was built in shared tasks, in the quiet of a meal passed across the fire, in the trust that neither would wield pain. The desert, vast and unyielding, seemed to cradle them, its silence no longer a weight, but a promise. Evelyn was no longer the cowering girl of her past. She was becoming a woman who could stand tall. And Nakai, whose heart had been buried with his family, felt it stir again, as if the land itself whispered of second chances. The journey of Evelyn and Nakai, carved from the harsh sands of 1870 Arizona, speaks to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of quiet compassion. We hope their story stirred something in you, perhaps a reflection on courage or the bonds that heal. Please share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear what this tale meant to you. With gratitude for joining us in this rugged corner of the frontier, we look forward to meeting you again for another story under the desert stars.